In a corner of the galaxy, far from the bright centers of power, there was a small blue planet that no one cared about. To the great Thalkari Empire, Earth was nothing more than a footnote in a long list of primitive worlds. Their records called it Sector 9 Delta 3. Inhabited, non-threatening. No resource value. No one in the Empire even bothered to look twice at it. But the people of Earth were changing. For hundreds of years, humans had dreamed of reaching the stars. They built rockets, satellites, and space stations. They sent machines to Mars and telescopes to the edge of the solar system. Yet for all their progress, they still hadn't made contact with any other life. Most people thought they were alone in the universe. Some still hoped they weren't. That changed one quiet morning when a strange light appeared in Earth's orbit. It wasn't a meteor or a satellite. It was an Imperial survey ship, small by galactic standards, but huge compared to anything humans had ever built. It shimmered like silver glass, silent and perfect. The world's space agencies went into panic mode. For the first time in history, Earth had visitors. At first, people celebrated. The news called it First Contact Day. Scientists cheered. Children drew pictures of friendly aliens. Governments rushed to prepare welcoming messages. But when the Imperial ship finally sent a transmission, it wasn't friendly. The voice that came through was calm, almost bored. It said, "This world is now under Imperial observation. You will not interfere," that was it. No greetings, no answers, no peace offers. The message repeated every hour for 3 days. Then the ship left without another word. At first, no one knew what it meant. Some said it was a warning. Others thought it was a mistake. But deep in hidden bases and underground bunkers, a handful of leaders understood the truth. The galaxy wasn't empty. It was full, and Earth had just been noticed by the wrong kind of people. The Thalkari Empire was massive, spreading across thousands of worlds. To them, Earth was laughably backward. They had faster-than-light ships, artificial suns, and planets that could change shape. Humanity had barely mastered solar panels. When Imperial scouts analyzed Earth's technology, they found nothing interesting. A few nuclear weapons, slow rockets, and endless political arguments. The Empire saw no threat, only a potential training ground for their new soldiers. In Imperial broadcasts, Earth became a running joke. Alien hosts on galactic news networks laughed at the primitive bipeds who still used combustion engines. They played clips of human TV shows and called them historical documentaries. Earth's entire culture became entertainment for millions of alien viewers, but humans saw none of that. Their own signals couldn't reach the wider galaxy. On Earth, the governments tried to keep everything secret. The public only heard rumors. Stories about strange lights, odd readings from telescopes, whispers that someone out there was watching. Yet beneath the surface, something big was happening. Over the next few years, every major nation quietly signed a secret agreement. They called it the Unified Defense Command. Its goal was simple: protect Earth from whatever was coming. Scientists, engineers, and soldiers from all corners of the world were brought together. Old rivalries were buried. The project was so secret that even many presidents and prime ministers didn't know the full truth. In an underground complex somewhere in the Arctic, the world's brightest minds worked day and night. They studied fragments of strange energy detected during the alien visit. They discovered that the Imperial ship had used a form of space distortion, a ripple in gravity itself that allowed it to move faster than light. No human technology could match that, but humans were creative. They didn't try to copy it. They tried to outsmart it. While politicians argued and economies rose and fell, the Hidden Alliance built something that no alien expected: a new kind of fleet. Not large, not flashy, but designed for one purpose: survival. The ships were small and compact, made from Earth metals and strange alloys, reverse-engineered from fragments left behind by the survey craft. Each one carried human pilots who trained in total secrecy. To the rest of the world, it was as if nothing had changed. Cities buzzed, people went to work, and children dreamed of better lives. But under the ice, humanity was preparing for war. Years passed, and the Empire forgot about Earth. The small blue planet drifted quietly around its sun, ignored and underestimated. But the humans never forgot that voice. "You will not interfere." That single line became their fire. They studied every message that came from the stars, every signal that hinted at alien life. They hacked into faint transmissions, sometimes catching broken fragments of the Empire's broadcasts. They heard laughter. Aliens mocking their art, their music, even their food. At first it hurt. Then it fueled them. The people working under the Arctic began calling themselves the Quiet Ones. Their motto was simple: let them laugh. We'll answer later. Their research expanded into fields no one outside the facility had ever imagined. They experimented with gravity fields, quantum folding, and instant matter displacement. These words sounded impossible, but for them, impossibility was motivation. The breakthrough came by accident. A small test ship vanished from the hangar one night during an experiment. For hours they thought it had exploded. Then it reappeared, not in the same place but on the other side of the facility, completely undamaged. The readings were unlike anything in recorded science. The ship hadn't traveled through space. It had skipped over it. Teleportation. It was unstable, dangerous, and poorly understood. But it worked. That was the moment humanity crossed an invisible line. They were no longer playing catch-up. They had discovered something the Empire itself had never mastered, yet they kept it secret. The world outside still lived in peace, unaware that beneath the ice lay a weapon that could change history. Meanwhile, up in the stars, the Empire's scouts returned. They detected strange energy bursts near the solar system and came to investigate. This time they didn't come quietly. A fleet of warships entered the outer system, not to attack but to inspect. Their goal was simple: make sure the primitive species stayed in its place. The Imperial officers were amused to find that humans had developed small colonies on Mars and the Moon. "Look at them," one commander said, watching the broadcast from his ship. Playing at civilization. Their amusement turned to arrogance. They decided Earth would make a perfect demonstration site for their new recruits. It wasn't about resources or strategy. It was about pride. They wanted to show the galaxy how easily the mighty Empire could crush an unadvanced world. On Earth, the Unified Defense Command saw the incoming ships. They knew they had no chance in a traditional battle. The Imperial fleet was too big, too advanced. But they also knew something else. Humans had one card left to play. Inside the underground control room, the leaders gathered. The air was thick with tension. Screens showed the approaching fleet like tiny red dots moving through the blackness. One of the scientists spoke softly. "If we use the teleportation drive now, there's no turning back. The world will know. They will see everything." The commander looked around the room, tired but calm. "The world deserves to know," he said. "And the Empire deserves to remember us." They called the plan Project Leap. It wasn't just a weapon. It was humanity's answer to centuries of being ignored. That night, as the Imperial ships reached the edge of Earth's orbit, the skies above the planet shimmered. No one on the surface knew what was happening. Some thought it was the aurora, others a new storm, but the Quiet Ones knew. The first human fleet was ready. For now, they stayed hidden, silent, invisible, waiting. The Empire thought Earth was weak, divided, and harmless. They had no idea what was about to come. Because in the cold, in the dark, beneath layers of ice and secrecy, a new chapter for humanity had already begun. The Empire looked down and saw a small, fragile world. But what they didn't see was the fire burning inside it, the determination of a species that had been laughed at for too long. The Empire had made one mistake that history would never let them forget. They underestimated Earth. The Empire didn't think twice about Earth. To them, it was just a small, noisy planet full of strange creatures who still used metal boxes to fly. Their leaders called humans loud animals with tools. When Earth's first message reached the Empire, a polite signal of peace and friendship, the Imperial officers laughed. They didn't even bother to respond in private. They played the message live on galactic news networks. Billions of aliens watched as a human representative spoke about unity, hope, and mutual learning. The Empire turned the broadcast into a comedy show. They added music and laughter. To them, it was all entertainment. Across the galaxy, viewers joked about the talking apes who think they're diplomats. Some said Earth was lucky the Empire hadn't turned it into a farming colony. Others said it would make a perfect zoo. On Earth, people didn't know this. The public still believed that first contact had been peaceful. Governments tried to hide the truth. They didn't want panic. But inside the Unified Defense Command, everyone knew what was really happening. They intercepted the Empire's transmissions. They heard the laughter, the insults, the open mockery. At first it hurt. Then it made them angry. Meetings were held deep underground, far from any signal. Every country had a seat at the table. Old rivals sat side by side, united by one thing: survival. The leaders listened as scientists played recordings of the Empire's broadcasts. Voices filled the room, cold, dismissive, confident. "This is how they see us," one officer said quietly. As a joke, no one spoke for a moment. Then another voice said, "Let them laugh. They won't be laughing for long." That sentence became a quiet promise. Meanwhile, in the outer solar system, small human probes tried to watch the Empire's movements. They saw massive ships passing near Jupiter's orbit, smooth, silver, and shining like moons. These weren't scouts anymore. They were warships, but strangely, they didn't attack. They just hovered, scanning. The Empire wasn't preparing for invasion. It was testing Earth's limits. They wanted to see how far humans would go before breaking, and the Empire's behavior became crueler. Their communication signals jammed human satellites, making them fall out of orbit. They erased Mars's colony databanks for fun. They sent distorted messages into human systems. Not threats, just laughter and mock applause, as if saying, "Nice try." It was humiliation on a galactic scale. Still, humans stayed silent. They couldn't risk open war. Not yet. The leaders of the Unified Defense Command agreed on one thing. If they were to survive, they had to act smarter, not louder. The Empire had numbers and power. Humanity had creativity and courage. In secret, construction of Project Leap continued. The teleportation technology was improving. Scientists had started to stabilize it. Small ships could now teleport short distances without exploding. Every test was dangerous, but they were getting closer to something real. Outside those cold labs, the world carried on. People went to school. Families argued about bills. Artists painted sunsets, and children played in the streets. No one knew that the fate of the planet was hanging by a thread, but under the surface, the quiet ones, the scientists, engineers, and pilots of the secret alliance, knew that time was running out. The Empire's scouts were getting bolder. Every week they came closer to Earth. One evening, the Imperial Council met on a floating city above a distant star. The hall was filled with shimmering light and the low hum of machines. At the center of the room sat the High Marshal of the Thalkari fleet. He was old, proud, and certain of his empire's power. He looked at the hologram of Earth spinning before him and said, "This world should be ours already. Send a fleet, make an example of them. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who think they can stand beside us." The order was simple: crush the joke. So, they began preparing their fleet. But the Empire wasn't rushing. They wanted to turn it into a show. They announced the mission across their networks like a sporting event. Reporters covered it. Soldiers placed bets on how long Earth would last. The mission even got a name: Operation Dawnfall. Back on Earth, the Unified Defense Command picked up the Empire's chatter. They knew what was coming. They knew they couldn't stop it with ordinary ships or missiles. But they also knew something the Empire didn't. The teleportation drive was almost ready. The test pilots called it the jump. They described it as falling through nothing and reappearing somewhere else. At first it made them sick, dizzy, and confused. But slowly they learned to control it. They could vanish from one side of the planet and reappear on the other in seconds. It was still risky, but it worked. When word reached the leadership, there was silence in the room. One of the scientists whispered, "We've done it." No one cheered. They just stared at each other, realizing what it meant. Humanity had built something even the Empire hadn't achieved. Something that could change everything. But they still didn't know if it could be used in space battles. Teleporting small ships on Earth was one thing. Moving entire fleets through space was another. They would have to try. As the Imperial fleet left its home system, massive waves of energy spread through space. Their engines bent light itself. From hundreds of light years away, Earth's observatories saw the flashes and tremors. They didn't know what they meant, but the Defense Command did. The invasion had begun. The Empire didn't hide their approach. They wanted everyone to see it. On alien networks across the galaxy, live feeds showed the shimmering ships moving toward the small blue planet. Commentators laughed, saying it would be over in minutes. Some even sold souvenirs: the fall of Earth, shirts, badges, and songs. It was entertainment. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Unified Defense Command activated its global alert. Quiet messages were sent through secure lines. Underground shelters were opened. Space colonies were ordered to evacuate. Even then, the public was told little. Government said it was a test, but people could see the strange lights in the sky, the silent panic in the faces of officials, and they knew something was wrong. In a dim control room under the Arctic, tension was thick. Screens showed the incoming fleet. Dozens of ships, each one larger than any human city. A calm voice spoke over the intercom. "They'll reach Mars orbit in 20 hours. The commander leaned forward. "Then we have 20 hours to make history." Outside, snow fell quietly, unaware that above it 2 civilizations were about to collide. The Empire's fleet entered the solar system like a storm. Their ships didn't hide. They moved in perfect formation, glittering like daggers in the dark. The Empire wanted to make a statement. They didn't sneak, they announced. Their first act wasn't an attack. It was a broadcast, a message that echoed through every human communication channel. The voice was cold, sharp, and full of amusement. "To the inhabitants of Earth," it said, "you have been found in violation of Imperial space. Your technology and systems now belong to the Thalkari Empire. Do not resist. Your world will be repurposed for training. You should be honored." Then the transmission ended with a soft laugh. For a moment there was silence across Earth. People looked up at the sky, confused and frightened. News anchors stumbled over their words. Social media exploded with panic. Was it real? Was it a hack? Inside the command center, the leaders knew it was real. The time for hiding was over. One of the scientists looked at the display, the fleet glowing red as it moved closer. "We can't win," she said softly. The commander turned to her and said, "Maybe not the way they expect." Then he gave the order that would change human history forever. "Activate Project Leap." Deep under the ice, engines began to hum. Blue light filled the hangars. Human ships, small compared to the Empire's giants, began to rise from their bays. They weren't built to run. They were built to strike. At that moment, across the galaxy, the Empire continued to laugh. They had no idea what Earth had become. No idea that the species they mocked was about to show them something they'd never seen before. The Empire thought Earth was just a joke. But the punchline was coming, and it would echo across the stars. The world above was quiet. People looked up at the night sky, unaware that far beyond the stars an enormous fleet was moving closer every second. The Empire's ships glowed like silver fireflies in the darkness. Their commanders were confident, almost lazy. They believed this would be the easiest conquest in Imperial history. Down on Earth, deep beneath the frozen Arctic, everything was different. The air shook with the hum of hidden engines. Engineers rushed through metal corridors, their faces pale from exhaustion. Every screen glowed blue, showing endless numbers and energy readings. The Unified Defense Command was running out of time. The Empire would arrive in less than a day. Inside the main chamber, the leader stood in front of a massive circular device buried into the floor. It looked like a ring made of black glass and silver veins. Blue sparks danced along its edge. This was Project Leap, humanity's last hope. Years of work had led to this moment. Scientists had dreamed of bending space for generations. They studied wormholes, gravity fields, quantum tunnels, and all theories that seemed impossible. But the discovery years ago had changed everything. That first teleportation accident had opened a new door. They realized space wasn't fixed. It could be folded just like paper. If you could bend it, you could make 2 distant points touch. For the first time in history, humans weren't bound by the speed of light. The machine was powerful but unstable. Every test carried risk. The smallest error could rip a ship apart or send it vanishing into nothingness. But there was no choice left. The Empire wasn't waiting. The lead technician looked up at the monitors. "Energy levels are climbing. The core is holding steady." The commander gave a slow nod. "Prepare the first fleet for jump." In hidden hangars across the planet, hundreds of human ships came alive. Their pilots were quiet, each one staring at their controls. They knew this wasn't just another mission. It was the mission that would decide if humanity lived or disappeared. These weren't perfect ships. Many were built using old cargo frames and spare parts. But every one of them carried the same symbol, a small circle with a single line through it representing the leap through space. Outside, the world's governments watched in silence through hidden screens. They couldn't speak about it publicly, but they all understood the stakes. If Project Leap worked, Earth would survive. If it failed, it would all be over before sunrise. Meanwhile, the Empire's ships entered Mars's orbit. From their view, the small red planet was a dull rock, a human outpost not worth a thought. They didn't even bother firing weapons. Instead, they sent a message to their fleet. The training exercise begins soon. They called the invasion a training exercise. On Earth, that message was intercepted by the Unified Defense Command. The words burned in everyone's mind. The Empire wasn't just coming to conquer. They were coming to practice. That realization hardened every heart in the command center. The commander looked across the room. "Start the sequence." At once, the teleportation ring began to spin. Energy flowed like a river of light. The floor shook as the machine roared to life. One by one, the ships were aligned inside massive underground launch chambers. Their engines glowed white. A pilot's voice came through the speakers. "This is Fleet 1. Systems are green. We're ready for jump." "Copy that," the operator replied. "Engage on my mark." The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then, light. Every sensor, every radar, every satellite, all went blind for a moment. The ships disappeared. They didn't move. They vanished. The teleportation drive folded space around them like a sheet of fabric snapping shut. For several seconds, the control room was silent. Everyone stared at the screens. The readings were blank, no signal. No trace then, a burst of static. "Control, this is Fleet 1. We're through," cheers erupted. Some people cried. Others just stared in disbelief. It had worked. The ships hadn't exploded or vanished forever. They had teleported, and not just anywhere. They had jumped from underground hangars on Earth directly into high orbit behind the moon. It was the first successful fleet-scale teleportation in human history. The commander leaned closer to the screen. "You've made it," he said quietly. "Now let's see if we can do it again." The next phase began. More ships followed, blinking into space like sudden flashes of light. Within an hour, hundreds of human vessels formed a silent fleet behind the moon, completely invisible to the Empire's scanners. The pilots looked out their windows at the blue planet below. It felt strange to be so close and yet unseen. They knew that somewhere out there, the Empire was laughing at them, preparing to attack. But now the joke was changing. One of the pilots whispered, "They think we're still down there." And she was right. The Empire's sensors scanned Earth's surface, detecting no signs of defense. They didn't understand how small ships had disappeared so fast. Their commanders assumed the humans were running or hiding underground. It didn't matter to them. They had orders to proceed. As the Empire prepared for its training exercise, the human fleet waited. Every second felt like an eternity. Then the moment came. The Imperial fleet reached lunar orbit. Massive ships covered the stars. Their engines lit up the blackness like sunrise. They sent another transmission to Earth, their tone casual and cruel. "Attention, primitive species," the voice said. "Your silence is noted. Your submission is expected. Prepare for restructuring." The message echoed across every communication channel. In the control room, no one spoke. The commander's face was calm. He turned to his officers and said, "They want silence. Let's give them thunder." The order went out. "Activate secondary jump." In orbit behind the moon, the hidden human fleet powered up again. Their teleportation drives glowed blue, forming rings of energy around each ship. Coordinates were locked, the heart of the Imperial formation. The pilots took deep breaths. There was no fear now, only focus. Then, in a flash brighter than lightning, they vanished. Far ahead, in the middle of the Empire's fleet, space twisted. In an instant, hundreds of human ships appeared from nowhere, surrounding the enemy formation. It was the first battle teleportation in history. The Empire's ships froze. For a moment, they didn't understand what had happened. Their sensors went wild, reporting impossible readings. No known species could do this. Where did they come from? An Imperial officer shouted. There was no answer. Across space, human ships moved with precision. They didn't have massive cannons or advanced shields, but they had the one thing the Empire didn't: unpredictability. They jumped, disappeared, reappeared behind the enemy, again and again, Every teleport created a ripple of blue light that flashed across the darkness. It looked almost beautiful, like lightning dancing between the stars. Inside the human command center, the operators watched the live feeds. It was working. The Empire's formation was breaking apart, not from power but from confusion. No one in the galaxy had ever seen a battle like this. But this wasn't just technology. It was something deeper, human will. Every pilot, every engineer, every scientist had poured their heart into this moment. They weren't fighting for territory or glory. They were fighting to be seen. For too long they had been mocked and ignored. Now the Empire was finally seeing them. Not as jokes, not as primitives, but as equals. Down on Earth, people who had no idea what was happening looked up at the sky. Some saw faint flashes of blue light, thinking they were meteors or strange auroras. They didn't know their species was rewriting history above them. In space, the human fleet continued to move, teleporting in perfect rhythm. They called it leap dancing, and appearing, striking, and vanishing before the enemy could react. The Empire tried to adapt, but their systems weren't built for this kind of combat. Their ships depended on predictable movement. They couldn't fight what they couldn't track. In the command center, the screens flickered as signals poured in. Victory reports, damaged ships, and status updates filled the air. The commander stood quietly, watching it all. "They're learning what it means to underestimate us," he said softly. And somewhere in the chaos, across alien channels, millions of viewers who had laughed at Earth fell silent. The broadcast had spread. The Empire's live feed, meant to show a simple conquest, was still transmitting. Now it was showing something entirely different. Humans turning the impossible into reality. For the first time in galactic history, the laughter stopped. The Empire had wanted to make an example out of Earth. They succeeded, but not the way they planned. Because that day, a primitive world did something no empire had ever done before. They broke the rules of space itself. Project Leap wasn't just a machine. It was humanity's message to the stars, and the message was simple: we are not your joke anymore. The Empire had expected an easy victory, a quick, clean operation that would make the galaxy laugh once more at Earth's expense. But now everything had changed. Their fleets, once proud and perfect, were in chaos. Their commanders shouted orders that made no sense. Their systems flickered. And their soldiers faced something they had never seen before: a human fleet that could appear anywhere, at any time. For the first time in generations, the Empire was afraid. But fear wasn't enough to stop them. The Thalkari were too proud, too certain of their dominance. Even as ships were lost and systems scrambled, their reinforcements arrived. The main invasion fleet was still on its way, larger, stronger, and far more ruthless. They would not allow a single primitive planet to embarrass their empire. And so began what history would call the Siege of Sol. In the deep black near Jupiter, the Empire's second wave arrived. Their ships were enormous, some the size of continents, glowing with lines of silver energy. They stretched across the void like a wall, sealing every path to escape. Their commanders sent one message to all surviving Imperial units: hold your ground. The storm begins now. Earth's Unified Defense Command received the signal too. Inside the Arctic facility, the command room was dim, lit only by screens showing the solar system. Each planet was marked with glowing icons: red for enemy ships, blue for human ones. And the red lights were multiplying fast. The operators whispered updates, their voices tight with fear. Second wave entering from Jupiter orbit. Third wave confirmed near Saturn. They're closing in from every direction. The commander stood silently, eyes fixed on the map. The Empire wasn't retreating. They were surrounding the solar system. The humans had won the first surprise, but now came the real test. Send the signal to all fleets, the commander said quietly. Phase 2 begins now. High above Earth, the human fleet waited behind the moon. Their ships floated in silence, their engines dimmed to avoid detection. Some pilots stared at the stars, others closed their eyes, whispering small prayers. They knew the Empire's main armada was coming, and they knew how massive it was. But they weren't planning to hide anymore. Each ship carried a teleportation drive powered by Earth's most secret energy source. Fusion cores refined in the underground bases. The scientists had warned that using them all at once could tear space itself. But there was no choice left. The plan was simple: strike first, strike everywhere. At exactly 0300 Earth Standard Time, the sky above the moon flickered blue. One by one, human ships began to vanish, jumping toward their targets scattered across the solar system. Some appeared near Mars, others near Jupiter, and a few deep in the asteroid belt. In an instant, the silence of space turned into chaos. The Empire's ships detected impossible readings, human fleets appearing behind their lines, firing, then vanishing again. No pattern, no logic, no warning. It was as if the humans were ghosts attacking from nowhere. Imperial commanders shouted over their comms, "Track them! Lock coordinates!" But every time they tried, the humans were gone. Their technology couldn't follow something that didn't move through space in the usual way. It was like trying to chase shadows. Back on Earth, the command center was a blur of movement. The operators tracked thousands of jumps, each one showing up as a flash of blue on the screen. Fleet 3 has engaged near Mars, orbit. Fleet 2 is drawing them away from the moon. Fleet 1 is defending the Earth corridor. It wasn't just a battle, it was a storm of light. From the surface of Earth, people could see strange flashes in the night sky. Some thought they were meteors. Others thought it was lightning in space. In cities, people gathered on rooftops, pointing upward, unaware that humanity's future was being decided just beyond their sight. For the pilots, every moment was a test of courage. The teleportation drives were unpredictable. One wrong calculation could send a ship miles off course, or worse, nowhere at all. But they didn't stop. Every jump was a risk they were willing to take. One pilot whispered into his headset, "We're not fighting for medals. We're fighting for home." And that spirit spread like wildfire. The Empire's ships began to fall back, but the Thalkari weren't known for surrender. Their fleet commanders ordered the activation of orbital bombardment systems, massive cannons capable of firing across planets. Their target was Earth itself. The command center picked up the readings instantly. "Energy surge detected." They're preparing to fire on the surface. Panic filled the room, but the commander's voice cut through the noise. "Deploy the lunar fleet now. Cut them off before they reach firing range." Without hesitation, a wave of human ships teleported directly between the Empire's cannons and Earth. They appeared in perfect formation, blocking the line of fire. The moment they arrived, the sky lit up with bursts of light. Not explosions, but energy clashes, colliding waves that shimmered across the darkness like glowing ribbons. The fight wasn't about destruction. It was about survival. Humans didn't have the power to destroy the Empire's capital ships, but they could disrupt their systems, jam their sensors, confuse their targeting arrays. Every second they bought was another second Earth stayed safe. Inside the Imperial flagship, the High Marshal watched the battle unfold. His silver eyes reflected the chaos. "How?" he muttered. "How do they move like that?" A young officer replied, "Sir, they are bending space itself. We have no countermeasure." The Marshal's jaw tightened. "Then learn, or we will all be remembered as the fools who lost to a child world." Back on Earth, the Arctic base trembled. The teleportation drives were overheating. Lights flickered, alarms echoed, and the room filled with the smell of burning circuits. The energy strain was enormous. The entire planet's power grid was being used to keep the teleportation network running. A scientist shouted, "We can't hold this for long. The reactors are reaching limit." The commander looked at the monitors, seeing dozens of human ships flickering as their systems strained under the pressure. "Then we hold as long as it takes," he said softly. "We didn't come this far to stop now." No one left their post. No one ran. Out in space, the battle grew more desperate. The Empire's reinforcements had arrived near Jupiter, cutting off escape routes. But humans didn't need escape routes. They simply vanished. They teleported in unpredictable patterns, attacking from behind, then jumping again. For the first time, the Empire's perfect formation broke apart. Their commanders yelled in confusion, their systems failing to keep up with the chaos. Across the galaxy, alien observers watched in disbelief. The live broadcasts that had once mocked Earth were now silent, replaced by stunned commentary. "They're winning," one alien broadcaster whispered. "The humans, they're winning." On the moon, several human pilots looked down at Earth, small, blue, and fragile. One of them spoke quietly into his recorder. "If we fail today, I hope someone finds this message. Tell them we didn't go quietly. Tell them we made them remember our name." Then he vanished into another teleport jump. Hours passed. The Empire's once unstoppable fleet began to retreat. not because they were destroyed, but because they no longer understood the battlefield. Every attempt to regroup ended in confusion. Every calculation failed. The humans had turned their greatest weakness, unpredictability, into their greatest weapon. When the Imperial flagship finally ordered a full withdrawal, the galaxy fell silent. No one had ever forced the Thalkari Empire to retreat. Not in 1,000 years. The news spread faster than light. On distant worlds, people cheered. On others, they watched in quiet disbelief. The word Earth was no longer a joke, it was a warning. But victory came with a cost. The teleportation network was collapsing. Systems across the fleet were overheating. Many ships couldn't return. Some vanished mid-jump, never to be found again. The command center went quiet as signals disappeared one by one. The commander looked at the screen, his face unreadable. "They knew the risks," he said quietly. "They gave us this victory." The operators bowed their heads, and then, slowly, the skies grew calm again. The blue planet still turned, untouched. The Empire's ships were gone, fading into the dark. The battle was over. For the first time in history, Earth had stood against the most powerful empire in the galaxy, and it hadn't fallen. It had fought, adapted, and survived. Project Leap had changed everything. In the silence that followed, the commander looked out through the observation window. Snow was falling again over the Arctic. The storm had passed, but deep inside everyone knew this wasn't the end. The Empire would never forget what happened here. Earth had won a battle, but it had also drawn the eyes of the entire galaxy. From now on, humanity wasn't invisible. It was something far more dangerous and unpredictable. And in the vast cold of space, even the greatest empires had learned one truth that day. You can laugh at humans. You can underestimate them, but you should never, ever forget them. The Empire's retreat left behind a silence that felt heavier than any explosion. The stars were quiet again, the flashing lights of battle gone. Earth was still there and blue, bright, alive. For the first time, humanity had defended its home and survived the impossible. But deep inside every human heart, there was no celebration. Only exhaustion, fear, and the quiet understanding that the war wasn't truly over. The Empire had lost a battle, not their pride. And pride was something far more dangerous than weapons. In the Arctic base, the command center was half dark. Most systems were damaged from the power surge. Sparks flickered along the walls, and the smell of burnt wires filled the air. Operators sat slumped at their stations, still wearing their headsets, too tired to even speak. The commander walked slowly through the room, his boots echoing against the metal floor. He looked at the screens that still worked, flickering dots that represented the few ships that had made it back. Out of hundreds, less than half were still showing signals. "They knew what they signed up for," he whispered. "But that doesn't make it easier." A scientist nearby spoke weakly. "We can't contact the missing fleets." The teleportation network broke apart during the last phase. Some might be lost in deep space. No one said anything. The silence said enough. They had saved Earth, but at a terrible cost. Far from home, near the orbit of Saturn, fragments of the battle still drifted. Broken ships, frozen bodies, shattered metal glowing faintly in the sunlight. Among that wreckage, a few human vessels were still alive. Their teleportation drives were damaged, leaving them stranded in the void. Inside one of those ships, the crew worked quietly, trying to repair what they could. Their food supplies were low, their power almost gone. But none of them spoke of surrender. They were alive, and that was enough. One crew member looked out through the cracked viewport. He could see Saturn's rings glowing like golden dust in the distance. "You know," he said softly, "it's strange. We've always looked up at these planets, dreaming about reaching them, and now we're here. After a war," another replied. "Maybe one day, when this is over, people will come here not to fight, but to build." The thought gave them a small hope. Even in the cold emptiness, hope still existed. Back on Earth, people had started to rebuild. The news of victory had spread across every city and village. Children ran through the streets waving flags, people lit candles, and strangers hugged one another. But behind the celebration, there was also a quiet understanding that danger still lingered among the stars. For the first time in history, humanity knew they were not alone, and that their existence was no longer hidden. In every government meeting and science lab, the same question was being asked: what happens now? The world's leaders gathered in a hidden location beneath the ocean, a massive steel dome called the Deep Chamber. There, representatives from every nation sat together. For once, there were no arguments about borders or politics. The Empire's attack had changed everything. A senior leader stood up and spoke, his voice steady but tired. "We've proven that humanity can survive, but survival is not enough. The Empire will return, and when they do, they will bring everything they have." The room was silent. Everyone knew it was true. Then one scientist spoke. "If they return, they'll come with stronger ships. We can't fight them the same way again, so what do we do?" Someone asked. The answer came from the same scientist. "We learn, we adapt. That's what humans do best." And so began a new phase. The turning point. Earth changed faster than ever before. Every nation combined its resources to rebuild the fleet. Old rivalries disappeared, replaced by a shared determination. Scientists who once worked on different continents now shared the same labs. Engineers built ships that could teleport more safely. Farmers, miners, and workers contributed materials, energy, and time. Everyone had a role in preparing for what might come next. But more than technology, something else had changed: humanity's spirit. They no longer looked at the stars with fear or arrogance. They looked with purpose. Even children began dreaming not of escaping Earth but protecting it. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond known space, the Empire was recovering too. Their capital world glowed with enormous cities and endless towers. But under that perfection was a deep humiliation. The Council of the Thalkari met in silence, their golden robes glimmering under cold lights. At the center stood the High Marshal, his head bowed. "We underestimated them," he admitted. "Their methods defied every law of physics we know. They used space itself against us." One of the counselors hissed. "They are nothing, a new species playing with fire. Crush them before they spread." But another spoke calmly. "No. If they have learned to bend space, they are no longer to be ignored. Study them. Find their weakness. When we strike again, it will be final." The council agreed. Plans were made. Fleets were rebuilt. The Empire would not rest until Earth was erased. Not because of fear, but because of pride. To them, losing to humans was a stain that had to be wiped clean. On Earth, the months turned into years. The world changed. Cities became brighter, cleaner, and more advanced. The teleportation technology, once used for war, was now being used for rebuilding. People could send food across continents instantly. Rescue teams could reach disasters in seconds, and communication between planets began. Humanity had entered a new era, but the people in the command centers never forgot what had happened. The Arctic base had been rebuilt into something larger, a new fortress known as the Leap Command. Its purpose wasn't just to defend Earth, but to prepare humanity to explore the galaxy on their own terms. Teams of explorers trained every day. They learned to use teleportation drives safely, to navigate uncharted systems, and to understand alien signals. They weren't just soldiers anymore, they were pioneers. The commander, now older and grayer, often stood at the main observation deck, watching the auroras dance outside. He knew peace was temporary, but he also knew something else. Humanity had changed forever. They were no longer the frightened race that hid behind their atmosphere. They were now part of something bigger. One quiet night, a signal appeared on the screens. It was faint but repeating, a pattern rhythmic and clear. It wasn't from the Empire. It was from somewhere else, deep beyond the known systems. At first, the operators thought it was noise. But as they decoded it, words began to appear. It wasn't a threat. It was a greeting. "Earth, we saw what you did. You are not alone." For hours, the command room was silent as everyone read the message. Then the commander smiled for the first time in years. "Looks like the galaxy finally noticed us," he said. The message was from another civilization, not part of the Empire, not hostile. They had been watching the battle hidden in the outer rim, and now they wanted to make contact. For humanity, this was a turning point. Not only had they survived the Empire's wrath, but they had also earned respect and curiosity and from others. The galaxy that once laughed at Earth was now listening. But not everyone on Earth agreed on what to do. Some wanted peace and communication. Others believed the Empire would strike again and that humans should prepare for war. Debates filled the airwaves. Arguments spread across colonies and stations. The commander called a meeting and said simply, "Both sides are right. We should be ready for peace, but never forget how quickly it can break." And so work continued, quietly, steadily, with purpose. New ships were built, stronger and faster. Scientists experimented with teleportation drives that could jump not just across space but through dimensions. Every failure was met with determination. Every small success was celebrated. Meanwhile, far beyond Earth, in the shadow of a dying star, a single Imperial scout ship drifted silently. Inside, a young officer stared at his console, watching a tiny blue dot on the screen. Earth. He whispered to himself. They think they've won. But the Empire remembers. He sent a coded signal back to the homeworld. The message was short but clear. Target located. Humans are advancing. The transmission vanished into the darkness. Back on Earth, people continued to live, laugh, and build. Children looked at the stars not with fear but with wonder. Couples held hands in parks rebuilt from ruins. Farmers grew crops on soil once burned by war. The scars of the battle remained. But they were no longer symbols of pain. They were reminders of strength. And high above, in the orbiting station known as Skyguard, the rebuilt human fleet floated in silence, watching. Their job wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The commander looked out one last time and whispered, "Let them come. This time we'll be ready." The galaxy had once laughed at Earth. Then it feared them. Now it was watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next, because the story of Earth was no longer about survival. It was about destiny, and every star in the sky now knew one truth. The humans had arrived, and they weren't leaving quietly. The years after the Great Battle became a time of quiet change. For the first time, humanity wasn't fighting to survive. They were learning how to live in a galaxy that finally saw them as equals. The old wounds from the war were still there, but they had started to fade. The skies above Earth were calm again, and the people who once feared the stars now dreamed of reaching them. Cities were rebuilt stronger than ever, not with fear, but with hope. The planet that once hid in silence had become a voice the galaxy could not ignore. And yet, everyone knew deep inside, this peace was fragile. The Leap Command, now expanded into a massive orbital ring around Earth, became the center of human progress. Scientists, pilots, and thinkers from every continent worked side by side. The teleportation drives that once tore holes in space were now stable, refined, and safe. They called the new version Phase Stream, a technology that could open stable tunnels between stars. For the first time, humans could explore other systems without losing ships to the void. The first exploration fleets were ready. Their mission wasn't war but discovery. Each ship carried scientists, builders, and historians, people who wanted to understand, not destroy. They called this new era the Reach. When the first ship prepared to leave orbit, millions of people gathered across Earth to watch. On every screen in every home, they saw the image of a single silver vessel rising above the clouds, gliding toward the blackness of space. For a moment, the world went completely quiet. Then as the ship vanished into the stars, the crowd erupted in cheers. Humanity was no longer trapped on one world. They were part of something far greater. But beyond the cheers, beyond the excitement, there were still people who remembered what had happened. The commanders, the scientists, and the soldiers who had seen the Empire's true power. They knew that the silence from the Thalkari was not peace. It was waiting. Deep in the galaxy, the Empire had not forgotten. They had rebuilt their armies, redesigned their ships, and studied human tactics. But even after all their analysis, there was one thing they could never understand: the human will to keep going, no matter the cost. The High Marshal of the Empire watched reports from the outer systems. "Earth is spreading," his aide said quietly. "They've reached 5 new star systems already." The Marshal stared at the glowing map. "Let them. The farther they go, the easier it will be to crush them all at once." He turned away, but there was something in his voice. Not just anger, but fear. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the humans were no longer the same fragile species they once mocked. Meanwhile, back on Earth, people lived in strange harmony. Children studied alien languages in schools. Farmers used floating drones to grow food in deserts. Engineers built homes under the oceans and in orbiting habitats. And in the Arctic, and is where it all began, the original Leap base still stood, now a museum and training ground. Visitors walked through the old command hall, where screens once flashed with the chaos of war. The room was quiet now, filled with displays showing messages from the soldiers who never returned. Every visitor stopped to read one message etched into the wall. Humanity doesn't conquer, it survives. That sentence became a symbol of what Earth stood for. The explorers who ventured beyond known space began sending back messages, stories of new worlds, peaceful civilizations, and strange discoveries. Some found planets covered in endless forests, others found cities built by species long extinct. But one day, a message came that was different. It came from a distant colony near the edge of mapped space. The transmission was broken and weak, filled with static. But one phrase repeated over and over. "They've found us." The Empire. "They're here." Panic spread quickly through the leap command. The screens lit up with incoming data, heat signatures, ship trails, and energy patterns that matched only one source. The Thalkari Empire. They were back. Earth's defenses were activated immediately. Fleets were scrambled, systems checked, and communication lines opened. But this time, humanity wasn't caught off guard. They had outposts, allies, and technology the Empire had never seen before. Still, everyone knew the truth. This would be the final test. The commander stood in the new control room, surrounded by glowing holograms of the solar system. "We've trained for this," he said calmly. "But we won't make the same mistake twice. This time, we don't fight for survival. We fight for freedom." The order was given. The fleet launched. Thousands of ships rose from Earth, shimmering in blue light as their teleportation drives powered up. They didn't wait for the Empire to reach them. They went to meet them. The two forces met in a region of space known as the Rift, a dark area filled with ancient debris and strange energy fields. For days, the battle raged in silence, flashes of blue and silver lighting up the void. The Empire's ships were larger, stronger, and more advanced, but the humans were unpredictable. They used the phase stream tunnels to appear behind enemy lines, strike, and vanish again. At one point, the Empire unleashed a massive pulse weapon meant to disrupt teleportation. It worked, for a few seconds. Then the humans adapted. They changed their frequency mid-battle, something no Thalkari ship could do. "Impossible," the Empire's officers shouted. But it was real. Every human ship moved like a living thing, connected, adapting, learning in real time. And then something unexpected happened. The new human flagship, the Horizon, transmitted a message, not a threat, but a choice. "To the Thalkari fleet, we don't seek to destroy you. Leave this sector, and no more lives need to be lost." The Empire's commanders laughed, until they saw what surrounded them. Dozens of human ships had opened phase stream portals around the battlefield, glowing blue like ripples in water. The portals weren't weapons, they were traps. The humans could collapse them at any time, trapping the enemy ships in space forever. The Empire realized it too late. The High Marshal gave a final order, his voice heavy with defeat. "Withdraw. For now." When the last Empire ship vanished into the darkness, the human fleet didn't cheer. They stayed quiet, watching the empty stars. They had won again, but this time they knew victory wasn't about power. It was about restraint. They could have destroyed the Empire's entire force that day, but they didn't, because humanity had learned something the Empire never would. True strength is knowing when to stop. Months later, the galaxy began to change. Other civilizations, seeing what the humans had done, reached out. Trade routes opened. New alliances formed. For the first time in galactic history, there was balance, not ruled by fear but by understanding. The Empire itself began to change too. Whispers spread among their people. Whispers of peace, of curiosity, of doubt in their leaders. The humans hadn't just defeated their ships. They had challenged their pride. And slowly, even the Empire began to question what power really meant. Back on Earth, life continued. The old commander, now walking with a cane, visited the Arctic base one last time. Snow fell gently outside, just like it had on the day of the first attack. He looked out the window and smiled. "We did it," he said quietly. "We made them see us." A young officer beside him asked, "Do you think they'll ever come back?" The commander thought for a moment. "Maybe. But if they do, they won't find the same Earth they once mocked. They'll find a world that stood together, and a people who never gave up." He turned to leave, the snow reflecting soft light on his face. "The galaxy used to think Earth was a joke," he said. Now we're the story they tell to their children, and that's how the legacy of Earth began, not as conquerors, not as destroyers, but as survivors who refused to fade away. Generations later, as humanity spread across the stars, every colony had a small plaque with the same words engraved on it. Here stood the children of Earth, the ones who made the impossible possible. In every corner of the galaxy, people still talk about that blue planet, the one that fought an empire with courage instead of cruelty, the one that showed the universe that small doesn't mean weak and silence doesn't mean surrender. The humans didn't just win battles, they changed what it meant to exist in the galaxy. And even now, as new worlds rise and old empires fade, there's one truth that remains in every story told under the stars. The Empire once laughed at Earth, until humans teleported their fleet into battle. And from that moment on, the galaxy was never the same again.